Okay, so, you know, we can talk about, you can advance it if you would. Thank you. One more. Isn't that a nice shot? What's a park? You know, I've gotten into this definition over the years. And, you know, when I mentioned my father saying I used to hunt rabbits, and I grew up hunting and fishing and being outside, and when he said I used to hunt rabbits and pheasants in that, where that shopping center is, you know, I saw development early on as kind of a threat to these things that I love to do. And so in my career as an interpreter, I was always looking for analogies or descriptions to convey the value of open space to people that maybe didn't hunt or fish. And so I was looking for those connections. And so what is a park? You know, you would ask people, what is a park? And, you know, there's ballparks, there's zoological parks, there's botanical gardens, there's all these different things. But there's also these large areas like the national parks, or state parks even, that were created with the intention of preserving these large amounts of open space. And it's fascinating to think that in 1917, when that legislation was passed in Ohio, you know, on the national level, it was parallel to what was going on, the debates to create the national park system. So there's a direct tie here. Okay, so you can advance one more time. So, you know, what is the value of that protected open space? And as I said, why are they important? And for me, I had that kind of grounding, you know, hunting and fishing and being outside, and it's where I felt best. And, you know, I was looking for things that could relate and other people could pull together. And if you could advance it one more time here. One of the early things that I recognized is there was commonality with wildlife habitat. An awful lot of people that I was dealing with and interacting with, you know, they would respond to wildlife habitat. So that was a real common denominator, and we don't know what that is going on, but we'll see here. That's a really nice picture, but I didn't take that. Kind of looks like Robinson Road in the old days, as a matter of fact. So what I found is an awful lot of people associated, I certainly did, associated forests with the natural world, right? You know, I would go out in the back of those farm lots and I would play in the forest. That's what I thought of as nature, or as a natural situation or natural environment. When I got a little bit older, we may be able to get right back where we started from here in a second. Let's see. Thank you so much for bearing with us here. But when I got a little older, I began to realize that you know, there was not just the kind of forest that I grew up in, but across Ohio, there were different plant communities that were representative of the large ecotypes that were across the state. And by the way, anybody taking in the canopy walk over at Bolton? Yeah, it's a great thing. You know, the tower is such a wonderful thing. And you know, can you imagine what Ohio, or the eastern United States for that matter, must have looked like, you know, before it was timber? And as early in my career, I started to realize that very few people understood that Ohio has been, 85% of the trees had been cleared by the turn of the last century. And if you want to read about that, there's a magnificent book called The American Canopy by Eric Rutlow. And if you're into that, he has just staggering statistics. The guy has done some amazing research. There's some slow parts in it. But just for example, him tracking down the amount of oak timber that was used by the railroads to build the rail lines, and the amount of timber that they used in building the trusses. You know, it's just staggering. And the eastern hardwoods, they were oftentimes just cut down and burned to get rid of because there was not sophisticated enough milling equipment and sawing equipment to even use that wood as lumber. Okay. I mean, if you go into W.B. Merson's book on the demise of the passenger pigeon, he talks about people coming in and cutting, you know, hundreds of acres of hardwood trees down just to get the pigeon squabs. Yes, it's a staggering thing to think about. So when you're up there on your, you know, at the Holden canopy walk or the observation tower, just imagine what the grandeur of those early forests. It's just a magnificent thing to think about. You know, I grew up, as I said, not only just playing in those little tiny, by my standards today, tiny woodlots, but I also spent a lot of time going up and down the streams. And you know, my father was an avid stream fisherman, and he would tell me, he would say, don't step into any water that's so deep that you can't see the tops of your tennis shoes, and I'll see you at lunchtime. And he would take off, and I would be alone. And I was like, you know, 19 years old, you know, and you know, grew up, and so I was really, really involved in and engaged with streams as a kid. And so when I started working at Little Miami, on the Little Miami River in Greene County, you know, I had the privilege of working with some of the folks that Dave works with at the founding of the Scenic Rivers Program, which in Ohio, it was the first state scenic river program in the nation, and it was a national model at the time. And I started realizing the importance of waterways and riparian corridors for habitat corridors and for just water quality and any number of different things. And I became quickly aware that there's a lot of people like myself that were deeply engaged with rivers, and they were willing to do what they could to protect and enhance waterways. And so I recognized that that was another kind of avenue for me to explore for talking about the importance of open space. As I continued on early in my career, I realized about the importance of wetlands. And I'll never forget the first time I stepped foot in a large wetland complex. And it turned out to be a very high quality complex. It's now known as Ankeny Fen. And there's a big portion of it that's a state nature reserve. And it was the first time I ever stepped into a wetland where you could look from horizon to horizon, north and south anyway, and not see anything but wetlands. It was just such a spectacular thing. And that's a rare thing down in southwestern Ohio. And so that motivated me to start looking into and understanding a little bit more about wetlands. And I realized that 92–95% of wetlands in Ohio and across the nation have been eliminated. And it was shortly after those early experiences at Ankeny Fen is when I got the opportunity to come work at Geauga Park District. And we were in the process of getting the money back for Kelso Lake, that acquisition. You know, and I spent several times and have many fond remembrances of spending time out with Dan Best, walking on the floating sphagnum mats, you know, and you know, trying to trick Dan into thinking that something was poison sumac, right around, because he's just deathly allergic to things like poison ivy and poison sumac. And I think I probably fell through the mat once or twice because of that cruelty. But anyway, you know, and so the Geauga Park District was a great experience. And I met a fellow that was quite a character. And Don Meyer, before he passed away, he told me, he said, you're going to have to be your own judge on this guy. And that was Fritz Neubauer. And Fritz had been building wetlands in northeastern Ohio well before it was de rigueur, before anybody thought that wetlands were any more than just a waste of property. And so Fritz and I hit it off, and we became very good friends. And matter of fact, he drove me around this block of land in 1987 and said, the Geauga Park District should own that block. That's a wild block. That land should be protected. So he was a real fascinating guy. And what he did is he emulated beaver dams. You know, it wasn't anything real sophisticated. He would just look at nature and try to reproduce that. And so, you know, that was a real cool experience. And when some of the things I learned from Fritz, I was able to apply at Lake Metroparks doing wetland mitigation. You know, because at the time, you know, a lot of folks like to forget or occasionally forget that the Clean Water Act, you know, was passed after the Cuyahoga River burned, but it was George Bush, the first George Bush, who said no net loss of wetlands across the country. You know, and we politicize everything today. You know, people will blame the Obama administration for being heavy-handed, or the Clinton administration, but the no net loss statement came from a Republican president, and he was committed to that, and it set some things in motion. And while I was in Lake Metroparks, we did a lot of work with the Army Corps of Engineers, and was able to secure property along the Grand River and the Chagrin River, and to do some wetland restoration in those areas. And if you want to know more about how magnificent wetlands can be and how important their role is. There's a wonderful book called Discovering the Unknown Landscape, A History of America's Wetlands, and this is by a lady, Ann Valisis, and it's a fantastic book. I found out in that book that Lucas County, Ohio, over in Toledo, that's where deep tile installation was perfected to drain the black schmuck. And Winus Point, which is one of the oldest duck hunting clubs in North America, they have records of all of their harvest dates going all the way back 125 plus years.